just finished this defund effort in Washington, which involved a debt ceiling standoff and a federal government shutdown. Was this a smart strategic play for Republicans? And when the government funding comes up again in January and the debt ceiling comes up again in February, what should Republicans do on these issues?
It's a great question. The debt ceiling is always a great cause. Our economy, right now, we're $17 trillion in debt. It's grown from $9 trillion back in 2008. I use the analogy of somebody here in Iowa with a $29,000 income. It's not a great income, but it's fairly common. If somebody was making $29,000 a year and had $36,000 a year going out, and was already $170,000 in debt, how much money would you lend that person? Not a single person would lend that person any money. Most bankers would already consider that person to be bankrupt. However, you tack a bunch of zeros onto that, that's where we're at. We take in $2.9 trillion, we're spending $3.6, and we're $17 trillion in debt. We have to focus on it. I'm the only person in this race that talks about a path to solvency. We balance the budget, we're still $17 trillion in debt. We have to look at all the different options. The way the budget's written, we don't have too many options left to us due to mandatory spending versus discretionary spending. So we're going to have to look at some of the things that are involved with mandatory spending, but we're also going to have to create jobs. The more people you get on the payrolls, the more people you got paying taxes, the more money you got coming in. So that's what we're going to have to focus on, and we should never give the fight for reducing our debt, getting ourselves out of debt. It's just embarrassing.
Thank you, Scott. Sam Coles.
The debt of the United States should be an embarrassment to every American, and because it is accumulating at a very rapid rate, there are many things we have to approach. I just read Mr. Costa's most recent interview with the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell. And in there, Senator McConnell was, I thought, very dismissive of the whole notion of holding anyone's feet to the fire when it came to spending. And I'm saying that as a Republican standing here on this stage, that that's not leadership and that's not what we need in the United States Senate. We have to grow the economy. The United States government needs to get out of the way of businesses, and we can grow this economy out past this debt. I'm an economist, and I'll tell you this, as soon as you get your debt past the 90% point and its debt to GDP ratio, you start to drag the economy. You get to 100%, you bring the economy to a halt. You get above 100%, it's almost impossible to grow the economy. We saw the job numbers, and I know we'll talk about jobs here coming out here. But what we have to do is get control of spending. So the position of the Republican Party ought to be greater concessions on spending. We ought to leave the sequester in place. That's been a good first step. And under the current tax code and all the other features of this economy that we have right now, we need to provide some certitude to the American people and businesses about where we are. Even if we don't change one word of the tax code, we ought to extend this current tax structure at least another 5 years, so businesses now know that they have some certitude of what's going on. And if we're going to stop the mandate on the Affordable Care Act, let's kick that can down the road a little bit. At least businesses know what's going to happen. The American people today are losing income at an incredible rate, but worse, they're losing their liberty. They're losing their liberty because the Congress of the United States and the President of the United States cannot seem to control their penchant for spending. Spending control is what's needed.
Thank you, Sam. Paul Lindy.
28 years ago, in 1985, working with Senator Grassley, I wrote a book called Great Restraint. In that book, I included a balanced budget amendment that will really work. Okay, the Founding Fathers made a number of minor mistakes when they drafted the Constitution. Some of those mistakes have been fixed. Remember slavery? That was in the original Constitution. We fixed it. Okay, but on a serious bent, the whole idea of our debt arose because the Constitution says the Congress shall have the power, and it lists about 20 things that it will have the power to do, and one of them is to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Nothing said about paying it back. And therein lies the problem. We owe $17 trillion, some of it to people who do not like us very much. I'm very uncomfortable about that. It can be fixed. I have tried for 28 years to get that balance the budget amendment introduced in Congress. I've tried Senator Grassley, Congressman Latham, I've tried this one and that one. Nobody is going to do it unless I do it, and I will. Okay? My balance the budget amendment works real simple. We stop deficit spending. We take away from Congress the power to borrow money, except in certain emergencies. And we give Congress a substitute revenue source. I hate to say it, but it's a small retail sales tax.
Thank you, Paul. Joni Ernst.
First, I want to state that I don't believe any Republican member of Congress wanted to see a government shutdown or for us to default on our obligations. But I do believe they brought to light what is the tragedy of Obamacare and what is our $17 trillion debt, and it's growing every day. So first, we have to stop spending. Right now, for every dollar that the federal government spends, 40 cents of that is borrowed money. And I know as a mom that I can't do that in my household budget. Only in Washington is it okay that we borrow 40 cents for every dollar that is spent. So we do. We have to cut our spending. And as a farmer's daughter who grew up in southwest Iowa, castrating hogs with her dad, I can go to Washington and cut pork. So we do have to stop the spending. And so I would support a balanced budget amendment. I would support that. I think that that is very important. But we can't just cut our way out of this situation. We have to grow our way out of this hole. And that means growing the economy, stimulating the economy. And the way that we do that, first we have to replace Obamacare with market-driven alternatives. I've stood against Obamacare here in the state of Iowa. We need to lower taxes immediately for hardworking families. I've helped pass the largest tax cut in Iowa history, $4.4 billion of savings to Iowa taxpayers over the next 10 years. And we must stop government overreach and burdensome rules and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. David Young.
I would have voted no to lift a debt ceiling without the fiscal discipline in the short term and long term, because we have to get away from this addiction to spending. We're spending our great-grandchildren's future away, and that's criminal. We need a balanced budget amendment. It's the only way out of this, folks, and we need to cut spending like never before. You know, the way we do budgets in Washington, it's bizarro world to me, but departments and agencies come up to Congress and they say, we spent this much last year, so we want that much and a little more, and Congress just gives it to them. And there's no accountability, and there's no transparency, and most times they spend it on waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement because nobody's watching the hen house there. We need to get to zero-based budgeting. What that is, a lot of states are doing it. You assume that these departments and these agencies, they start with nothing, and you make them come up, and you make them beg and justify for every dollar they want to spend. That's how you'll get accountability. And we need to, people talk about auditing the Fed. I want to audit the whole federal government. I want to know what they're doing with your money. The federal government's watching this, but nobody's watching them. So we need firm oversight of our budget, and we need to cut. There's a lot to be cut. There's a lot of fat on our federal budget. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And we'll finish this question with Matt Whitaker.
This question of strategies and what they're doing in Washington, D.C. is really not what I talk to people around the state about. What I talk to people about, and what I hear from them, is the economic uncertainty. And as the games are being played and the strategies and tactics are being played out at our nation's capital, we continue to have economic uncertainty in our lives. We cannot continue to manage this government by crisis, going from debt ceilings to fiscal cliffs and doing it all over again 3 months later. And that's where we're heading with this. I was really disappointed in the solution they came up to the debt ceiling, that for the first time, they have now eliminated a hard cap number. It's just a date certain now, February 7th, which, again, we're going to be right back with the same old music, with the same people conducting the music. The burden on American families in the second quarter of this year is the highest it's ever been from taxes from the federal, state, and local. No wonder people like Tammy that I talked to today are worried about their jobs and worried about paying for her daughter's college, because we need to come up with a real plan to solve this. And it's fairly simple. One is we need to cut the things that we all agree to, and whether that's redundant government programs or whether that's waste in our federal government. And then second, we need to make the tough choices. Choices on things like aid to countries that don't like us very much, and departments of commerce that have 47,000 bureaucrats that most of them, we don't know what they do. And then we do need to get rid of baseline budgeting, and we need to then give a small, across-the-board cut year over year to every department. Because what I saw when I was a United States attorney and managed a budget within the federal government is you make your managers manage. And then finally, we do need a balanced budget amendment. It needs to cap it at 18.5% GDP and provide very few exceptions to that.
Thank you, Matt. Candidates